Greetings, I'm Scott Grahams. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Landscape Contractors Association. We've got a great group for today's webinar entitled Plant B 2020 Plant Shortages. First, I want to also welcome members of the Illinois Green Industry Association to today's call. This program is being promoted by both organizations, and IGIA has been an invaluable ally during the past 6 months. Now, we haven't seen many of our members in person for quite some time, but we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of these Zoom calls. And landscape professionals, I know, were not only thrilled to be able to work this season, but also have been very happy with how busy and productive they have been. With clients stuck in their homes, most of those clients sought ways to improve their new home offices, their new home schools, and let's face it, really their new home everything. This has obviously had its advantages for the landscape industry. However, the dark side to any busy season is always going to be a lack of supply. Plant shortages dominated the banter that happens before and after a lot of our web meetings that we've been having with the ILCA. And members would be asking about a certain plant that they couldn't find, like they were looking for their lost puppy. And we felt that this webinar was properly timed to discuss the plant shortages and what can be done as we move down the home stretch. Also, many contractors are already booking for next year. And again, that's absolutely great news, but it is going to constrain the plant market that much further. So we felt it was best to gather a panel of growers to walk landscape professionals through the next few months of the season, and also discuss what lessons could be learned and stored away for 2021. If anyone on the call has questions, we are going to use our question box. We're going to have a question and answer period at the end. So as you can see, that is our question box. So to ensure you have a positive experience, your screen is going to look something like this. And to the left is the GoToWebinar viewer, through which you will see the presentation. To the right of the GoToWebinar panel is where you can raise your hand and ask questions in the chat box. And the control panel will automatically collapse when it's not in use. And to open it, you can click View and then uncheck the Auto Hide control panel. If you want to ask a question, you can submit your question via that panel, and then at the end, when we have our Q&A session, I will read the questions to the panelists. And you can either ask your question to the entire group or to a specific panelist. So before we begin, I now want to turn the webinar over to Jennifer Fick of Wilson Nurseries. Jennifer is the supplier representative on the ILCA Board of Directors. And what that means as supplier representative is that it's her job to be a conduit between contractor members and suppliers. And it's her responsibility to make sure she listens to the landscape member challenges that require supply side solutions. And I've known Jennifer for many, many years. She definitely understands the structure and speed of the landscape industry like no one else. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and she's going to say a few words before we introduce our distinguished panel. Jennifer?
Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. We are really happy to have the chance to talk about plant availability and the challenges and the opportunities that come with it. As Scott said, I'm Jennifer Fick, and I'm one of the owners of Wilson Nurseries and Landscape Supply, and I will be moderating today's discussion. One of the things that I really like about the ILCA staff is how they respond to members' needs. Scott called me several weeks ago and said that he had been hearing a lot about plant shortages and asked what the association could do to help. And so here we are. I think that conversations like this are invaluable because they put people from all aspects of our industry together so we can learn from one another and be better. Today, we're going to cover topics such as what has caused the shortages, substitution recommendations, steps that you can take to make things easier this fall, and what growers are doing to increase production and bring more of the plants that you're looking for to the market. We've also set time aside at the end to answer your questions, as Scott said, so be sure to ask them in the question box. And the panelists are the only people that are unmuted, so that is your way to get your questions answered. You may also have questions on where to locate specific plants, and we will definitely address as many of those as we can. We're going to keep today's call to about 60 to 75 minutes, so we may not get to each specific request. So be sure to ask those questions, and we will make a resource available after the webinar to make sure that we address everything we can. So before we begin, I'd like to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, and then we'll be off and running, and we are going to start with Andy.
Good morning. My name is Andy Fick with Wilson Nurseries. I grew up in the nursery industry. I have 30 plus years in many different positions, from hand crew digger, sprayer, on up to directing all the work. I do have a degree in horticulture from the University of Illinois, and one thing that Wilson Nurseries does is we buy our shade tree liners, so we understand that supply side, but we also produce almost all of the other products that we sell locally in our own propagation. So it gives us a kind of a unique view of all of the different production levels.
Thanks, Andy. JR is having a little technical difficulty, so we're hoping that he'll be able to get on soon. So we're going to go to Becky Thomas.
Hi, Becky Thomas, Spring Grove Nursery. We're just south of Morris. My husband, Jamie, and I own and operate our 100-acre wholesale tree nursery, specializing in B&B field-grown trees, generally in the 2 to 4-inch caliber range. We grow about 150 different kinds of trees, ranging all the way from Acer down to Zelkova. Our customer base consists of contractors, municipalities, park districts, IGCs, re-wholesalers, and landscape architects and designers. And then we'll ship direct from the field in the spring and fall, but then also we have an above ground holding yard that we ship out of all season long.
Thanks, Becky. Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Melin from Midwest Groundcovers out here in St. Charles, Illinois. I've been with Midwest for about 12 years, mostly on the sales and operations side of things. And I'm the sales operations manager here. As most of you guys probably know, Midwest Groundcovers is a supplier to landscape contractors, IGCs, re-wholesalers in the greater Midwest, and we supply finished perennials, ground cover shrubs, and natives.
Thanks, Nikki. And Ann?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ann Tosovsky from Home Nursery, probably the outlier of the group. We're farther down south, about 34 miles east of St. Louis. I'm 3rd generation business owner for Home Nursery, and I am excited to say that we are going to be celebrating our 100-year anniversary in 2021. So hopefully that will be an amazing year to be able to actually celebrate. Home Nursery, we serve about 13 states around the Midwest. We produce a broad line of shrubs, some shade trees and roses and perennials and ground covers. Our customer base is landscape contractors, distribution centers, and IGCs. And that's my little elevator pitch right there. Thanks.
Thanks, Ann, and congratulations on your anniversary. Marc.
Good morning, everybody. My name is McCormack. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at Bailey Nurseries. For those of you that don't know, Bailey's is located or headquartered in Minneapolis area. I actually live in the Chicago area, and I have for my entire career here at Bailey's. I've been here about 28 years, but I work with all of our sales and marketing people, brand management. We distribute and grow products at primary locations, Minnesota, Oregon, and Illinois here. Not unlike what Anna said, we distribute across most channels of distribution, but because of our bare root side, in addition to the finish side, we work a lot with growers, certainly here in the Midwest, but also around the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Marc. Thanks, everybody. So let's jump in. Andy, can you tell us a little bit about what you know about what might have caused some of the shortages that we're experiencing?
You bet. When you came and asked me to participate, I've been hearing from some of the customers that they've been having a little bit of a hard time. So that caused me to really reflect, and there's really a couple ways you can go about it. You kind of have to take an overview of what has caused some of the challenging inventories, and then you can kind of break it down more specifically by type, whether shade tree, ornamental, or perennial shrub kind of thing. So from the big picture, one of the things that has affected inventory, I think broadly, is there are fewer nurseries out there. They've been slowly kind of, unfortunately, going out of business or moving along. So obviously that reduces a lot of the numbers that are available. There are reduced quantities of liners of certain things. And when you throw that together with a time factor of what needed to be produced 5 or 10 years ago and what a mindset was back then, like boxwood, those take 10 years to get to a nice saleable size of about 18 inches, the way that we produce them here in the Midwest. So you have to look back then and try to forecast how many you're going to sell this year. And there are a lot of nurseries that aren't quite back to their pre-production numbers before the recession. It seems like a weird thing to say, but we still see some of the echoes of that coming through today just because of the production timing. And then, of course, we all know demand is great, and we're all thankful for that. But the inverse is the production numbers that are out there obviously are taking a hit and moving fast. People want to hit a sales goal, so they sell higher units of smaller items like shade trees. You sell a lot more 2-inch, and it's hard to get the quantity numbers up so you can sell 3-inch or larger a lot of times. And then if you kind of break it down to more type specific, like shrubs, there's say hydrangea, there's a lot more plant varieties. If you grew 50,000 units, but you only had 10 varieties, obviously 5,000 units per variety. But if you increase your production by 50%, 75,000 units, but now there's 25 different varieties you want to grow, now you're down to 3,000 units. So there's just a lot of factors that really play in to turn out the kind of numbers that we want to have, because obviously none of us want to run out. We want to serve as many people as we can. And then there's a few things that are not as big picture, like the polar vortex a couple of years ago. They took out a lot of varieties of shade trees and ornamentals. So there's a lot of factors like that that really play into what's going on. Even this spring, with the COVID, some nurseries, we weren't sure how many things we should harvest, how many should we bring and dig and hold above ground. So that could affect some of the numbers too. So that's a lot of different ways that hopefully give a little bit of a big picture look as to why there are fewer units of inventory that people are looking for, and not as many large sizes as people are looking for. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anybody else have any thoughts on that they'd like to share? Okay.
I can say something really quick. I think from the nursery perspective too, we've been seeing a lot of labor shortages, just like landscape contractors have. So that's definitely put us behind in production in some areas, just because we don't have as much labor as we need at the moment. And speaking to the COVID thing, I think this spring, especially with perennial production, we in particular start a lot of our perennial production in March, and we were pushed out about a month because beginning of March, everything was so unknown and scary, and we were projecting big decreases in sales for the year, so we kind of pumped the brakes on production. And of course, then we saw plants coming in to selling about a month or 2 months later than we would have liked. So that was a big thing this spring.
Good point.
And I
Anybody
think,
else?
yeah,
Ann?
just to reiterate Andy's point from the grower side and those long-term crops, like you said, we're making those decisions 5, 7, 10 years ago on what we think is going to be saleable in 2020. And so you miss the mark by a little bit, and you really miss it.
Yeah, good points all. Thank you. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about what people might be a little bit short on and what substitutions we're recommending for just a couple of the plants that maybe we're seeing a little bit of a shortage on. So we'll just start again with Andy. What are you seeing that things that you might recommend for things people are short on?
Some of the things that we see are some of the larger sizes, whether it be shade trees or ornamentals, or even larger shrubs. That seems to be a little bit of a hole. There's certain varieties of perennials that some of the larger producers had some challenges with. Some of the ways that we've chosen to combat this is we've actually narrowed the plant palette a little bit, and really have done a lot of research as far as what a lot of the product that the customers are looking for, and try to increase a lot of those numbers, and where a few things have fallen off the radar. Instead of having some of them to produce, we've chosen to not produce them at all, to have a deeper unit count for the varieties that people seem to be looking for.
Mm-hmm. Becky, what about you?
I think for us, right now, we kind of, in certain species, we have a larger caliper, but we do see them to be selling a lot at a smaller size just due to the demand for that. So then, having to make those decisions about keeping some back to let them get bigger, I know that's something that growers are always struggling with. So in certain types of species, larger caliper trees, we might be a little short on right now. For us, maybe more like harder to grow species, like Aesculus or tulip tree or some of the hornbeams that we don't always bring a high percentage to market like we would with an easier grow species.
Mm-hmm.
But when those are popular, you don't quite have as many of them as you'd like. And then, just the obvious like slower growing trees, because we have a long timeline for what we do in the field. So those are always a little slow. We never quite have a Japanese tree lilac because they're kind of slow out there. And then just like within a season, if we have a shortage, sometimes it's because of an inconsistent liner supply 4 or 5 years back. Like all the liner companies had a real shortage on State Street maples, so then that kind of catches up. So that might be another example. And then of course, always the hot new trees like skinny latte coffee tree or things like that everybody starts to hear about, but then you don't really have it ready yet because we just all got liners. So that's one that I keep getting asked about this year, that we have it in the field, but they're not ready yet. So usually what we'll do if people are looking for something that, we don't have at the moment, we'll try to find a similar species or size and sub for that. And then again, kind of rely on our above ground holding yard and try to, pick something else that we think would work well for our customer.
Thanks, Becky. What about you, Nikki?
I was looking through inventories, over the last week, and overall, I think we have pretty much recovered from what we experienced earlier in the year, which was pretty rough. We're still seeing some holes in like Hosta Patriot and Echinacea Magnus. We're trying to pick up production on those things, but from us in particular, we are still seeing some holes in inventory, and we'll see some sort of shortages this fall. Kind of the bigger topic that I want to bring up is Vinca. So I think We've seen a big shortage in Vinca, especially in like 3-inch or more smaller plug sizes all throughout the year, not just from us, but from other growers. There's not as much Vinca out there currently. And just so everybody kind of understands that, I think with Vinca, sometimes people don't know how long the production cycle is. So Vinca is actually like almost like a 9 to 12 month crop. And we've seen a decline in demand over the last couple of years. So we've kind of been pushing those numbers down. And all of a sudden this year, we saw a complete explosion in demand for Vinca out of nowhere. And kind of like shrub production, we can't catch up very quickly. So we are working to try and build our Vinca numbers back up, but we are going to be very, very short this fall. And I would project that we're going to be a little bit short going into spring next year as well. So just so everybody kind of has a heads up on that. And two more particulars that I saw that are bigger holes, Hydrangea Vanilla Strawberry and Hydrangea Strawberry Sundae. We are completely out of, and I don't think we're going to have any until next June. So I think the good thing is a lot of us growers who do, carry Hydrangea paniculatas or any of these plants in particular, we don't carry just one. Like, for instance, we carry 15 different types of Hydrangea paniculata. So just keeping an eye on inventory numbers and being prepared for subs, I think will be good because we might not have one variety, but I think a lot of us will have a very comparable sub. So keeping our eyes on that.
That's a good point. Thank you. Anne.
Sure, thank you. We're always like, I don't know if we're behind the 8 ball or what on our boxwood green velvets, but we never can seem to grow enough. We always tend to take a conservative approach to our production numbers, but maybe it's too conservative. So we're looking at trying to work with customers and maybe replacing that with an Ilex flavor gem or the Ilex strong box. Another thing that we have holes in our candy corn spirea, and so subbing that with spirea sun drop or a double play gold, and even recommending customers move to something that's not even a spirea, like a Daredevil or a Weigela. Winter gem boxwood, also a shorter item for us. So you talk to customers about subbing boxwood sprint. So those are a few of the holes that we've seen and working on trying to get those numbers up as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Anne. Marc?
Sure, thank you. Being from Bailey, produce both finished container plants as well as bare roots, so maybe I'll kind of speak high level about both. But on shade trees and on the finished side, container side, it's been mentioned that larger sizes have been short and really strong in demand. We're seeing the same thing. 10-gallon and 25-gallon in particular. We don't grow any field stock for B&B, so a 10-gallon, is inch and a half. 25-gallon is that inch and a half to 2, and those sizes in particular have been really strong in demand. Jennifer mentioned earlier, that things that have caused shortages. Well, go back to the recession, as Andy mentioned, we've really tried to balance production against sales to where we sell out, because that's how we make money. And I think that has a tightened supply, and in a year like this, made it sales of maples, locusts, elms, lindens, I would say lead the pack in terms of our shade trees. And Carpinus was mentioned, Aesculus, we have not had enough of those by any means. We've also seen some strong resurgence in demand for malus and crab cultivars. On the bare root side, the trees in particular, when the pandemic kind of locked us all down back in March, I think we felt that on the grower side in particular, we would see some decline, but that we actually have not seen that in terms of demand for liners. And we're just finishing up our first round of confirmations for 21, and the demand for tree liners continues to be strong. Shrubs, finished sizes that are larger, 3-gallon in particular, strong demand. Hydrangea paniculata, hydrangeas in general have been mentioned. Paniculatas, Nikki just mentioned they have 15. I think we probably have at least that. And every time we want to add one, we feel like we should take one away. But the fact is, they continue to be really, really strong. Macrophyllus, and La Summer in particular, also very strong this year, which has been really good to see. Evergreens, I'll just touch on that real quickly. Junipers, in particular, upright junipers, have been very strong in demand. Just can't meet that supply. Some of that, I think, is deer pressure, certainly, but again, it's very much in short supply. We sub arborvitae when we can for the junipers, but it doesn't always work. So, in general, like I said, shade trees and larger, and back to the time it takes to produce, whether it's own root or budded, you're talking, really 3 to 7 years by the time we could bring it to market. So that also has impacted those shortages. Thank you.
Thanks, Marc. So now one of the things we want to talk about, what customers can do to mitigate some of these shortages. And so let's start with Becky. What do you think people can do to help with some of these shortages?
Well, I think it kind of depends a little bit on why you're having trouble finding what you need. So a few reasons that might happen, at least I'm going to speak kind of from the tree world because that's what I do. One thing would be a fall versus a spring plant. So some trees are spring dig only, some are both. For example, a spring dig only tree like oak or birch or redbud, they're only going to be harvested in the spring. So in the fall, you need to make sure you're using one that was spring dug. And then sometimes that makes them hard to find in the fall. So, knowing the timing of when stuff is being harvested from your grower is helpful in kind of alleviating any problems that you might have. Use a grower too that has a good holding yard that gives you a lot of flexibility in your options when you're trying to find something that's out of season. Another reason why you might have a shortage is you're looking for a plant that has had a weather or production issue. So some certain trees, and we've mentioned a few of them already, are just hard to find no matter what. And usually that's because lots of times they're a slow grower or they've had a weather issue in people's fields. For example, we're doing inventory right now. We just found a row of some pyramidal hornbeams and some firebird crab apples. They were beautiful, ready to harvest, and they all had some trunk splits in them, probably from last winter. A few years back, we had a few liners, not too many, but a few that we lost during that polar vortex. So those shortages kind of show up either right away in the supply chain or they take a few years to catch up. The best way to mitigate a shortage in that case, if you're looking for one of those kind of plants, is to be flexible, be willing to sub a different size or a different species. If you know your grower really well, then when you're looking for something, they can help you kind of know a little bit more about what you're trying to achieve with that plant and recommend another option. So growers really have a wealth of knowledge about the plants that they're growing, and it's good to rely on that. And then another reason you might be experiencing a shortage is you have an unplanned job site change, or a last minute project comes up and you hadn't been prepared and you're kind of scrambling for the plants that you need. Or you thought you had ordered the plants and you come to find out they're not available after all. So a way to mitigate that situation would be to, again, know your grower. If you have a good relationship with them, a last minute surprise, like an order not being ready, should rarely happen because usually they'll know that well in advance and give you a heads up. Also, it's really important to be familiar with what your grower has in their fields. If you're regularly visiting and you understand their production, their harvest schedules, their selection, what's coming on in the future, then you can have a good pulse on what's really available out there and make a sales decision accordingly before a problem arises. And then if that were to happen, your grower, something happens and you can't foresee, then they can give you some suggestions and talking points. You can take that to your customer, and then you're the one that's coming out with a good solution for your customers. So I think that's a good way to handle that situation.
Thanks, Becky. Nikki, What do you think about this topic?
Sure. So I think one of the things we really saw this year, and I think it really was just with everything going on, everybody being busier, is less lead time leading up to some of these projects. And some of the projects were pretty big. So with inventory shortages, not a lot of lead time, that equates to a pretty bad situation all around. So I think being more proactive with your grower, I think, is a really good idea. I know sometimes that's hard, but the longer lead time that we have, the more we can troubleshoot and problem solve for you guys up front. Another thing is when we're getting a lot of these last minute requests, it's really hard for us to gauge overall demand. So on things that we're able to be more reactive on, especially like on the perennial side of things, where if we have big numbers move out, we can pop things up pretty quickly and have them ready in, you know, a month and a half, 2 months. If we're seeing this like quick outflux of material without a lot of lead time, it puts us in a position where, yeah, we're going to have some pretty big inventory holes. So that's definitely a struggle. So with lead time too, the earlier you guys can get your orders to us, the earlier we can reserve that inventory. I think that's really important. Again, it allows us to gauge demand. So if we have to bump up numbers on things we can respond to quickly, we can make sure we're fulfilling all the orders we need to. And then also it gets you guys in line for allocation. So again, the earlier you guys can place your orders, even for next year, I know with the tree growers, the better. So you guys can get, you know, up in that line for allocation if we're short on things. The other thing I kind of want to bring up, and I know it's pretty obvious, but it's checking online availabilities. And I guess I know that everybody's like so busy and there's not a lot of time to really do research up front. But a lot of growers now have invested in online availabilities that are pretty timely, so you guys can see exactly what's out there. And I think you can clearly see, if you look at those things, some bigger holes in the market right now. And that allows you guys to be more prepared with knowing, like, okay, you know, hydrangea little quickfire, you couldn't find it anywhere this summer. Well, like we've talked about, there's like 15 other, 20 other, 50 other paniculatas on the market that you could sub with. And others might have been available. So I think troubleshooting ahead and just being like more keyed in and reading those availabilities and looking for plants, especially if you guys have a particular palette. I know a lot of landscape contractors, they have a set palette that they work with for the most part, if they're not doing like big jobs. So if there's plants that are really key to your, you know, designs, take a look and make sure that they're easily accessible out there. With substituting too, I know that can be a big challenge if you're working with a landscape architect or working directly with the client. The time frame to get subs approved can kind of stop things up. So again, being more aware of what those availabilities are, we can troubleshoot early, get the subs approved, and get things moving so you guys aren't falling behind either, because we're not able to fulfill an entire order. Now, again, if you guys don't have time to look at availabilities, I think all of us growers are more than welcome to help you guys with that. So the earlier you can get us your lists, lead time is just such a big thing. The more we can help you be proactive and troubleshoot early on to make your projects go as seamless as possible.
Thanks, Nikki. Anybody else have any thoughts that they'd like to share? Okay. Next, we're going to talk about what growers are doing to increase plant production. So we're going to start with Marc.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. You know, when it comes to looking at what we can do to try to be more proactive or reactive to shortages, you know, we try to evaluate our sales and planting schedules throughout the year, continuously, throughout each season, and certainly throughout each market around the country. And that allows us to make some changes. As mentioned, especially with shade trees, you know, from propagation, whether it's budding, grafting, or on root, to the time that it's finished as a bare root liner or as a finished plant, you know, it's anywhere from probably 3 to 10 years. And so, to meet that demand well into the future, we meet once a year formally, and we look at the variety we grow, every size we grow, and we set a schedule. We've been fairly tight the last few years because, again, as I mentioned, we've tried to balance any surplus, that we had when you go back into the past, and again, wanting to sell out. Well, the whole process, again, takes that 5 to 10 years on average. When we say what can we do best to mitigate the shortages, it's propagation. And so on the tree side, again, it's a bit more difficult than on the shrub side, but we typically will take more risk in taking more cuttings or making more potted liners, making more 1 gallons that we're going to use for shifting, things like that, because if we have those smaller input sizes, it does allow us a faster reaction time if, in fact, when we're meeting throughout the year, we make changes in our planting schedule, and again, then we can react and as hard as possible. It's our lowest risk when it comes to financial propagation. As mentioned numerous times, timing, the demands coming from you guys, the customers, is super important. So the more proactive you can be, as mentioned, the better it helps us in planning and looking at overall market demand.
Anne?
Thanks, Jennifer. What we are trying to do to increase plant production is we are, kind of like what Marc said, we're always looking at our numbers. We're tweaking our numbers, so we're getting more. We're wanting to grow more of what sells more, and we look at plants that with the numbers just maybe aren't quite there. And can we shave those numbers or eliminate that variety altogether, and then put those numbers into the plant that we just can't seem to grow enough of. Becoming efficient with allocating space. That's another thing. We would love to grow everything out there. I'm a plant. I love plants. I don't have a degree in horticulture. I'm a business person. I love plants, but I'm not the plant geek. So, I work with all the plant geeks who like, let's try this, and we love to try new things, but you only have so much space. You can only grow so many things, and where are you going to get basically the biggest bang for your buck in terms of what's holding that space in the nursery? Can we grow something in a 3 gallon and get more in that space, or is it something that has to be grown in a 5 or a 7? So we are constantly looking at those things, trying to maximize every angle of things as we can. And then, when that's not enough, then we just find our property. So, or expand on property that we have. So we're increasing our pot production in our perennial area, and we just bought property in Tennessee. So that's why I kind of joked about that. Just buy any property. It's easy. It's only money, right?
Thanks, Anne. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? So let's move over to what everybody is increasing production of. What do you and your growers talk about when you're planting those future crops, and what do you see you're increasing? And we will start with Andy. Hey, Andy. I don't think we can. Can't hear you.
How about now?
There you go.
Okay, I was just waving at everybody before this. One of the things that we've been doing is, as we talk about the time factor of production, we have for the last 8-10 years been working on increasing a lot of our own propagation numbers. So even like a crab, it's a 4-year propagation and a 4-year field finished product for a first saleable size, which would be 5 or 6 foot. And then to get the 7 or 8 is another year or 2. So even though it's kind of hard to show everybody that it's occurring out in the field. The other thing we've done is, like we've talked about, we've watched the production or the sales numbers on some things decrease. So we've gotten rid of those particular varieties, and we've increased the numbers of the varieties that really seem to be the way that the customer base is moving. Shade trees are a little bit more challenging just from the standpoint of the producers are having their own challenge from a time factor for all of us people that buy the shade tree liners to finish those. And then one of the other things that we do, like where we see holes in our inventory, there are certain ways we can ramp up production on particular products so that we produce it. Or if we have a hole of a woody shrub like Monterey lilac, we'll call it Marc, and if he's got a few extra, we'll put those in a container and finish them off quicker so that we can meet the customer's needs.
Thanks, Andy. Becky.
For us, if we, as a tree grower, if we cut back or increase a particular species, we kind of have to root that decision a bit in education, market research, and then the pulse of our customers. So we try to stay in tune with all of those things so that we can make the best projection of the market demands for 5 years out. And we'll look at previous sales numbers and tweak production based on what we consistently see that we either have too much of or too little of. So for example, next season, we might increase production a little bit on plum serviceberry. We always plant a very set amount. We're very consistent in general with our planting schedule, but we always plant a set amount. But for 4 or 5 years now, we sell out rather quickly on that, and we see a demand staying steady. So we might plant a few more of those next year, and then we'll hold steady on that number for a while before we would adjust it again. We also plan to maybe increase production next year on kindred spirit oak. That's a columnar variety of oak that we've been growing for a while. We also grow Regal Prince, which is similar, but it matures to a wider habit. So we're seeing a consistent demand for the kindred spirit because of its tight habit. So we might increase those numbers a little bit, but we'll keep the Regal Prince numbers the same. So when we make a production decision like that, we'll look at the overall market trends, so not just for our industry. And then what consistently grows well for us in our fields here, what our customers are asking for, what new tree development, varieties are in development that we think shows promise. And then we'll overlay that with our sales history and make adjustments as necessary. But in general, we're not doing any dramatic increases to anything because we're currently meeting our customers' needs pretty sufficiently.
Thanks, Becky. What about the folks at Midwest, Nikki?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is a much stronger kind of fall sales period, which has put us short going into spring. So one of the things our production team's really focusing on is much stronger fall potting. So our plan is to really bump up our numbers this fall to cover both fall orders and to go into spring with higher availabilities. We always feel a little risky doing that with winter loss, especially the year at the polar vortex, we lost a lot. So it's a little bit riskier for us on the grower side of things, but we do want to make sure we have stronger availability across the board going into spring. So that is something we're very actively doing right now. Particular plants, we are working really hard to get our hydrangea paniculata numbers up. Like Marc said, we just can't keep them stocked. They're just flying out. So we're working really hard to bump those numbers up as well. Another thing that we're doing is, I think, there is still talk of You know, us being in a recession currently or a deeper recession on the horizon, we're taking a less conservative approach than we did this spring. So pretty much we are full steam ahead into 2021. We're not cutting back our production at this time, just because we still feel like next spring is going to be a strong spring for everybody. So we want to be prepared and have what you guys need, you know, to make sure we can take care of that. The other kind of last thing I want to talk about is we are trying to increase the conversations we're having with sales and production. So we meet every 2 weeks, and you know, we're trying, the sales side, salespeople are trying to bring up larger orders and quotes that we're seeing on the horizon, just to get production more connected with what's going on in sales. I think it's really easy on the grower side of things for sales and production to live in separate silos. And we're trying to bridge that gap so production has a better pulse on what's going on in the industry and just an overall better idea on what we're facing. So, you know, again, that's always kind of a struggle in productions out there in the nurseries growing our great plants, but we're really trying to bridge that gap so they can be more reactive. And when sales comes to them and says, hey, like, we're seeing this, we're seeing that, they take our word for it and they make adjustments accordingly. So, and then finally, as far as forecasting goes, Marc talked about that as well. We do one major forecasting review a year, but we built another one in. So we look at forecasting actually after fall sales now, again, because fall has been pretty strong over the last couple of years, I think, across the industry. So building in that second forecast review allows us to be a little bit more nimble, especially on the perennial and even a little bit on the ground cover side, to bump up numbers where we can.
Thanks, Nikki. Ann.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of like what Nikki and Marc said, yeah, we look at forecasting, primarily one big meeting a year, but we tweak it as, you know, at different times throughout the year as we can in shorter term crops. If we're seeing some holes and if we have an opportunity to either buy in liners or propagate new liners to get some product back in the pipeline, we try to do that. We look at, you know, certainly when we're bringing in or thinking about new products to grow, you know, we have a whole list of criteria of, you know, what questions we ask in terms of should we add it to our product line or not, you know, how much can we sell it for, what's the market saying about it, you know, how does it grow in a container, how much does it cost us to grow, can it replace another item in the product mix, does it have multi-season interest? So there's a whole slew of questions that we ask before we'll even bring in a new item to our product line. But in general, what we're seeing increases of production on right now is the fragrant viburnums, hydrangeas, lilacs, taxus, and boxwoods. And for us, our larger sizes would be, you know, 7s and 15s. Which might be some smaller sizes for up north, but those are things that we're working on. We're recognizing that we've got to jump those numbers, and we too are we're typically pretty conservative. So this, you know, taking the risk is kind of, you know, a little nerve-wracking, but we feel the market is strong and moving forward. We like somebody else said, you know, we're losing growers, so there's an opportunity for us to fill those gaps and fill the numbers to be able to supply the customer. So we are moving full force ahead with that.
Thank you. Marc, what about at Bailey?
Thank you. Yeah, we spend, as mentioned before, a lot of time, and we do it consistently throughout the year. We try to discussing market trends. And again, we're looking not only here in the Midwest, but around the nation, looking at overall demand for specific territories. We also spend a fair amount of time looking at disease and the pressures those are putting on us in bringing product to market, and certainly insects that may be impacting production and sales as well. We rely on input from our customers very heavily. We rely on input from our sales staff. Again, looking at market, you know, demand and trends well out into the future. We have a process where we ask our salespeople to contribute specific nominations, as we call them, to our planting schedule. And we review that quarterly. And that allows us, again, to stay on top of all of the latest and greatest cultivars and certainly trends and those plants that are doing the best in a particular region, in a particular market. The other piece that really plays into what we're talking about and what we're increasing numbers on is our own internal cost study. We look at whether it's a bare root tree liner or a 25-gallon tree. We look at every variety, every size, and we have a cost study where we can go down into the detail and say, are we making money? Are we meeting our profit goals when it comes to that? Obviously, I think we've all mentioned the time is probably the biggest component here that makes this so difficult. But I can tell you now, some of these have been mentioned already, but Amelanchier, clumps, and specific cultivars, I would see us increasing. Larger autumn blaze maples, there haven't been enough of those this year. We've heard it from all the territories, certainly here in the Midwest. A lot's been mentioned about columnar trees, whether it's Carpinus speculus, the Stygiata, or the oaks, very, very strong. I think we would be increasing there. Aesculus and various cultivars there. Coffee tree was mentioned, upright junipers. Paniculata, hydrangea, paniculata cultivars, both in tree form and in shrub form. Again, I think it's been mentioned numerous times today. I'll speak to hydrangea maxilla. Obviously, endless summer is ours, and we love it. And it's probably had one of its best years in the almost 20 years that it's been on the market. And that's in all channels that it gets distributed into. I'll mention brands just in general, because I think in the audience here, we've probably got people from many channels, but it's not just retail where branded items are selling well. You guys mentioned the paniculatas, for example. Most of those fall under a brand, and it's not certainly just Bailey's brand, but I think we're all learning that the consumer pull through the marketing, the promotions, the campaigns that exist out there on branded items that are good, tried and true items, again, is applicable to channels that get distributed into, including the grower and field grower channel. So those are exciting and positive. But again, I think the best thing we do is try to gather that input from you guys, from the customers, from our salespeople on what we ought to be doing. And we do that throughout the year. Keeps us on our toes.
Thanks, Marc. So now we'd like to open it up to some of the questions that you all have asked. So I'm going to have Scott go through some of those questions.
Sure, we've gotten quite a few, so we're going to go through as many of these as we can relatively quickly, and we might have to leave some on the cutting room floor, but we'll do our best. Have any of you found a great way to engage commercial landscape architects? Oftentimes their palettes can be repetitive and their quantities can be rather large. Have you found ways to educate them about the growing process so that they can make more diverse choices? And if they knew it was going to be in short supply, they may stop speccing it for the time being. That's for the panel.
I would say that goes back to getting to know your supplier and communicating with them when these large jobs are expected to be installed. Obviously, there can be a 6 month or even a year delay between when the job was sold and designed versus then when it's shipped. And if a lot of those products aren't available, they'll need to be obviously ordered far ahead of time. And that, as Nikki alluded to, can give a lot of us growers the chance to meet the need for that project, because we want to sell that job and that project, but we also don't want to let down all the other landscapers who might take the same kind of product. If somebody needs, 2,000 Grollo sumac and it's a surprise order, that obviously leaves a hole in our inventory for the other contractors. So if we know that ahead of time, we can produce to those levels so the job gets the product they're looking for and also the quantities. But then it's just also discussions with your grower where, hey, this year inventories are short and they need to have the time frame to go back to the architect or the project owner and explain what a good sub would be.
Yeah, and I guess I would say too, if you're a landscape contractor and you pick up one of these large jobs, through a landscape architect, it might be good to get your grower involved from the beginning. And, the question I think is great. And I'm not sure any of us, we haven't cracked the code on really integrating ourselves with landscape architects. So, if you guys pick up one of these large jobs and there's some stuff that just looks uncertain to you, or maybe varieties you haven't seen out there, maybe, your growers that you're going to use, for the project, get them involved from the beginning and maybe make introductions to landscape architect to help us get connected with those folks. So then we can help, again, troubleshoot from the beginning if we see things that are going to be a problem.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Are any of you taking into account with your forecasting climate change and the cycles for growth of plants? And with the climate getting warmer, is that influencing your oversupply or decreased supply of certain plants?
Yeah, in our fields, what we see in regards to that, we have a pretty diverse palette of trees that we grow, and some of them are traditionally kind of borderline trees like sweet gum or tulip tree, and we do well with those. But in regards to climate change, I think it's a little broader than just looking at trees that, and I'm just going to speak about trees that handle a little bit warmer of a climate, because what we're kind of seeing, it's broader than that. It's more like extreme drought or extreme flooding or a little bit warmer or a polar vortex. So what we're always looking for are trees in our field that can survive and thrive, not just survive, but thrive and survive in all of those extreme conditions. And I think that is really what we need to be looking for in regards to climate change issues. So stuff that's consistently, especially over the last 10 years, we've just seen some really dramatic weather situations. And I think growers are already doing a really good job of sorting out what those species are.
And I think too that probably reflects in demand from the customer, as well as, the landscape contractors out there having to make replacements or whatever, and they're going to tell us, well, that plant is maybe no longer surviving and thriving, so the demand for that plant will decrease, and which will also become kind of a red flag to us, and can ask more questions and figure out more about those issues with that.
Yeah, that's a fine line to walk. We want to make sure we bring enough of a product that we're growing to market, but we also want the job to be successful. So if something is going to fail, I guess I would rather have it fail on me instead of once it gets installed and then it fails on the job site. Knowing that quite a few jobs, there's a 1-year warranty on a lot of things. So we want to take that into mind to make sure that a lot of the jobs are successful and it's a good experience for everybody. So obviously they keep on using more plants.
Can any grower point to a definitive list of plants that are a good list of spring versus summer or late fall digging? Does anyone have a list that either they provide through their nursery or a resource exists somewhere that they could point contractors to?
Yeah, we kind of have an internal list of that here. I think that would be a really great thing to follow up this webinar with, though. All of us growers, I think, probably have those kinds of lists, and probably all have those out there in their own ways. But I would just, Scott, maybe take note. I think that'd be a great follow-up that we could each kind of put together to people listening to the call, because I do think that's very important in regards to shortages.
Anyone else? What are the top 5 trees that are in great shortage right now?
I'd say this, it's a little hard to figure that one out just from the standpoint of everybody's beginning production numbers are different. So if I'm out of autumn blaze, Becky might have some just because I planted fewer than she did, for, just an example. So it's a little hard to figure out when it comes to that, specifically by type, I would say. It doesn't help anybody, sorry.
I think I do think that there is a shortage generally on larger caliper trees of things like ginkgo, coffee tree, stuff like that, that seems to always sell at the smaller size. So that's kind of like a general category, larger caliper trees. I do have a lot of autumn blaze though, so Andy, if you run out, I got some over here.
We actually still have good numbers, but yes.
That's good, yeah. And then there's, like I mentioned earlier, those harder to grow species like Aesculus or pyramidal hornbeam or stuff like that, that kind of always has little glitchy problems here and there. Those are generally always going to kind of be on the harder to find list for people.
I think the other category would be larger ornamentals, clump form. I think like big amelanchier, cornus mas, bigger viburnum, those are things, and even clump form crab apples. Those are things that I have seen a lot of people asking for that are not available as much as they'd like.
Yeah, and it's again that larger stuff, because we're going to get that up to 6 foot in our field and be able to sell out of them because there's a great demand. Do I want to risk keeping those for a whole nother winter and have some kind of crazy polar vortex that cause damage? No, I'm going to sell those. So instead of maybe holding some back to be 8 or 10 foot. So that's why you see a lot of shortages in the larger caliper size things right now. A lot of growers have to make those production decisions.
Yeah, the one thing we have seen a little bit is obviously, let's take pears. The pear production has dropped precipitously the last bunch of years. We found a crab called starlight crab. So if people are looking for a good replacement for a crab, there's a potential option, a lot of the same characteristics. But it's hard to come up with real specific examples like that, again, because each job is so different and a customer's needs are so specific. It's hard to really dial it down so much.
Nikki, you mentioned longer lead times for orders. How much more lead time should be added to a typical order?
Well, I think those kind of larger commercial jobs, growers should be involved in the beginning. So, kind of like Andy said, a lot of times the lead time on those is 6 months, a year, sometimes a year and a half. So as soon as you get and secure those projects, you should be bringing your growers in, I think, right from the start. So again, we can start those conversations. As far as other size orders, I would say, if you can get them as soon as possible. I know there's a lot of, quick turn stuff that happens, but give us a couple weeks at least. And again, that we can really see based on our inventory systems what we're going to be short on. So if you give us, a week or two on a smaller order, we can really be sure that we're going to have what you need for your job. If it has bigger numbers, again, a month, 2 months out, if you have the information, I think is super helpful for us. We just want to make sure you guys have really smooth, once you've got to get that job, and we know it happens really fast. If you have that order booked and we've reviewed inventory, that way when it's time to get that order in the ground, we can execute quickly and smoothly.
Yeah, for us in the tree world, the season ahead. So we're moving into fall right now. I'm getting orders for next spring. This past, end of the spring or summer, I had orders for this fall. So the customers that are getting exactly what they want and the size that they want are the ones that are ordering it well in advance. And that only works if you know what you want, but lots of times you do kind of have a good idea of your projects coming up, or your normal plan of what you like to bring in.
So we're going to do 3 more questions. No one has spoken about arborvitae yet, and yet there seems to be a number of shortages with that type of plant material. Are you still seeing those shortages and that need, and which specific ones are in short supply?
I guess I would say the short answer is yes. We still see the shortages. That goes back again to the time factor of production and the high demand of that particular product. A lot of the varieties that are popular here in the Chicago market, the Mission and the Niagara, that's almost more of a regional type of plant instead of an emerald green. Those are a little bit easier to come by, the emerald green. But we're working hard to produce them, and we've got thousands in the field. They're just not quite up to size yet. So I see that going on for a little bit longer.
Scott, I would agree with Andy. Niagara and Tecza in particular, we don't really have shortages on the small ones. Getting them of any size, yeah, it just takes time, and the demand is there for the larger sizes. And to the question, we're also seeing increased demand, certainly in the zone 5 and warmer for the placata type, and very much demand in the warmer climates where they're used.
Has the supply of Japanese maples from Oregon become a declining trend? And are there more that can be recommended besides just the red varieties?
I think we buy in, we don't grow our Japanese maples, we buy them in from Oregon, especially the lace ones. I think we're really tight supplies on those ones. And I think there again, it's a key factor. It just takes a long time to get those things to market. So I'm not sure that that's going away anytime.
I would agree. We do the same thing. We buy a lot of Japanese maples in for our 4 locations, and same thing. It sounds like a broken record, unfortunately, but a lot of their production was lagging 8, 10, 12 years ago, and those are the sizes that we're seeing now when they start them for propagation. I already have my order in. It's been confirmed from a couple months ago for next spring, and I'm actually trying to get some more, and it's challenging. There's not too many new varieties. They're growing a lot of the ones that have proven successful for them to propagate fast and that are pretty hardy. So unfortunately, I think it's a lot of the tried and true varieties that are most prevalent out there.
Yeah, I would agree. And if we're talking specifically for zone 5A or the cold part of zone 5, the polar vortex did its number on many palmatum cultivars, and I think that also impacted, the supply after the a lot of replacements. So a lot were sold, but really, there are 5 really good varieties that even during the vortex they took a hit, but may not have died out completely. But that also has impacted supply here recently.
Okay, we're going to do two more questions. One quick one. Does anyone have a viburnum that is resistant to the viburnum beetle that can be recommended? Nothing but blank stare.
Yeah, not sure. We're growing the opening day, which is a real nice variety, and I have not had a lot. It's a newer variety to us, so I haven't had lots of feedback on that. But that seems to perform pretty well. I don't know if Marc has seen that or not.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen it on opening day or other placatums. Maybe on that species, it's okay. Placatums, we see it, no matter the. But the placatums, we don't. I don't know that we see it on lantana, like Beacon type, or the crosses, like Emerald Crown. I guess I don't know for sure. I haven't seen it recently.
And last but not least, we can close with this. I know no one has to open up their books here, but what trends do you see with plant pricing overall moving forward, as well as for the growers on the call, margins?
Nobody wants to speak up on that one.
I will
I'm
say,
waiting to see what you're going to do, Andy.
I would say, labor's going up. A lot of the input costs are going up. And we'd all like to grow more plants, and obviously the more we can increase profits, we'll be able to turn out more units to meet the need. So I would probably say they're going to get a little bump.
Yeah, we're planning on probably doing a little bit of a price increase for next year. And as far as growers' margins, I would highly recommend that everybody watch Charlie Hall's video on grower margins, because everybody gets pinched, but growers get pinched pretty hard. Our labor costs are increasing quite a bit because we just don't have the labor market we used to, and our input costs are going up as far as plastics and things like that. So, but that Charlie Hall series is excellent. So if you're curious on grower margins, definitely check that out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Nikki. He's a great resource in our industry for all parts of the industry. But the value that our plants provide in the landscape and provide to the end consumer is, it really is priceless. And especially now in the age of COVID and what our society has been experiencing, we're in a great industry. We can really deliver what people need. So yeah, and I do think margins are real tight for growers. So there isn't going to be any way for us to deliver the quality that our customers need to be able to deliver to their consumers. We have to be able to stay competitive so that we can continue to provide that value.
I'll add to that, Becky. Sorry, value is a really good point. When you think about the time it takes and the way the supply and demand curves have shifted, demand seems to be exceeding supply, which gives us room to sort of capitalize on that value. And I think we all do it conservatively, but I think now, again, it's an opportunity for us to get more at the wholesale level as well as at the retail or landscape end user level. In addition to that, you mentioned since COVID, we haven't talked a lot about that, but I think we truly believe that since COVID and since March, there really is a new respect and certainly recognition of landscaping, our surroundings, and certainly where we feel safe. And that's in our own yards. And I think that's important as we look at that value and how we price in the future as well.
I just want to thank everybody for their openness in answering the questions. Unfortunately, we had to leave some unanswered. We'll look at those and determine, as we plan future conversations about this topic, how we can integrate some of those questions in the subject matter. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Jennifer, to close us out.
So I'd like to thank all the growers for coming in from the field today and lending your expertise. It's always really interesting to hear perspectives from colleagues and to know that you're not alone and get some really great ideas. And on behalf of ILCA and IGIA, I want to thank everybody for participating. We hope that this conversation has been beneficial and helpful and that you feel better prepared to make this an even greater fall than we are hoping for. As a grower, I always appreciate hearing from contractors, designers, architects, and I think you've heard that from everybody here. We really appreciate being a part of the conversation and being involved in as much as we can because it helps us grow better for our customers. So if you don't have a close relationship with your growers, I really encourage you to develop one. It's going to benefit you immensely. The program's been recorded, so it will be shared with all the participants, and it'll take us about 48 hours to get it online and posted. We have kept all of the questions that we didn't answer, so please know that we'll provide the resource and get all of those answered afterwards. If you think of something that you would like to ask the panelists afterwards, you can send an email to ILCA at information@ilca.net and we'll get you a prompt response. Thanks again to everybody, and we wish everybody a great second half of the season. Thank you.
Thank you.